A bright-eyed 9-year-old girl pedaled her purple bicycle down Maple Street on a warm July afternoon in 2012, her blonde pigtails bouncing with each turn of the wheels. For 12 agonizing years, her parents believed she had simply wandered too far from home and met with an accident in the nearby woods. But when renovators tearing down an abandoned house 3 blocks from where she disappeared made a discovery beneath the basement floorboards, the truth that emerged was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. A revelation that would expose a web of deception that had hidden in plain sight for over a decade. Emma Richardson had always been the kind of child who brought sunshine into every room she entered. At 9 years old, she possessed an infectious laugh that could lift the spirits of even the most weary adults, and her boundless curiosity about the world around her made her a favorite among neighbors and teachers alike. On that fateful afternoon of July 15, 2012, Emma wore her favorite yellow sundress with tiny daisies printed across the fabric, the same dress her grandmother had sewn for her 9th birthday just 2 months earlier. The July heat had been building all week, reaching a sweltering 87 degrees by the time Emma finished her lunch of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, cut into triangles just the way she liked them. Her mother, Sarah Richardson, had been folding laundry in the living room when Emma skipped through the front door, her small hands already reaching for the handlebars of her beloved purple bicycle. The bike had been a Christmas gift 7 months earlier, complete with white handlebar streamers and a small bell that Emma delighted in ringing whenever she rode past the elderly Mr. Peterson's house next door. Sarah glanced up from the towels she was folding, watching through the window as Emma adjusted the plastic flower decorations she had attached to her bike's front basket the night before. "Stay on our street, sweetheart," Sarah called out, her voice carrying the gentle authority of a mother who had repeated this instruction countless times. "And be back before 4 o'clock for your piano lesson with Mrs. Henderson." Emma nodded eagerly, her face glowing with the excitement that only summer afternoon adventures could bring. She had been looking forward to this bike ride all morning, having spent the previous day inside due to thunderstorms that had kept the neighborhood children indoors. As she pushed off from the driveway, her small legs pumping with determination, Emma waved to her mother one final time. It was 2:47 p.m., and Sarah would later remember every detail of that moment with crystalline clarity. The way Emma's sundress fluttered in the breeze, the sound of her laughter as she rounded the corner, and the terrible finality of watching her daughter disappear from sight. The afternoon stretched on with the lazy pace of summer, and Sarah continued her household tasks, occasionally glancing at the clock as it approached 4 o'clock. By 4:15, she felt the first stirrings of concern. Emma was rarely late, especially when it came to her piano lessons, which she genuinely enjoyed. Sarah stepped onto the front porch, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun as she scanned the street for any sign of her daughter's purple bicycle. "Emma," she called out, her voice carrying down the quiet suburban street. "Emma, it's time to come home." The silence that answered her call sent the first cold tendrils of fear through Sarah's chest. She walked to the end of their driveway, looking in both directions down Maple Street. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, with most children having retreated indoors to escape the heat. Sarah's heart began to beat faster as she noticed the absence of the familiar sound of Emma's bicycle bell, a sound that had become as comforting as her daughter's laughter. By 4:30, Sarah's concern had escalated to panic. She ran back into the house, calling Emma's name throughout every room, checking closets and bathrooms with increasing desperation. Maybe Emma had come home while she was distracted and had fallen asleep somewhere, but the house remained stubbornly empty, filled only with the echo of Sarah's increasingly frantic calls. She grabbed her car keys and drove slowly through the neighborhood, her eyes scanning every yard, every alley, every possible hiding spot where a 9-year-old girl might have stopped to rest. The purple bicycle was nowhere to be seen, and none of the neighbors she frantically questioned had seen Emma since she left home that afternoon. At 5:15 p.m., Sarah Richardson placed the call that would change her life forever. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911, her voice cracking as she spoke the words that no parent should ever have to utter: "My daughter is missing." The initial police response was swift and thorough. Officer Martinez arrived within minutes, followed by Detective Susan Walsh, a veteran investigator who specialized in missing persons cases. Detective Walsh, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, sat with Sarah in the living room while officers began searching the immediate area. "Tell me about Emma's usual routine," Detective Walsh said gently, her notepad balanced on her knee. "Where does she like to go when she rides her bike?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, as she described Emma's favorite routes: the loop around Maple Street, the path to the small playground 6 blocks away, and occasionally the short ride to her friend Jessica's house on Oak Avenue. Emma was a responsible child, Sarah emphasized, always following the safety rules they had discussed countless times. As the evening wore on, the search expanded. Neighbors emerged from their homes to join the effort, flashlights cutting through the gathering darkness as voices called Emma's name. The local news crew arrived by 8 p.m., their bright cameras capturing Sarah's tearful plea for information. The footage would be broadcast throughout the region, showing Emma's school photograph, a smiling girl with gap-toothed grin and sparkling blue eyes, alongside the description of her purple bicycle. The first 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. Search teams combed through the nearby woods, checking every trail, every stream, every abandoned structure. Volunteers distributed flyers throughout the city, Emma's face appearing on telephone poles, store windows, and bulletin boards. The FBI was called in on the 3rd day, their resources adding to the growing investigation. But as days turned to weeks, and weeks stretched into months, the trail grew cold. Emma's bicycle was never found. No witnesses came forward with credible sightings. The woods had been searched 3 times, with cadaver dogs finding nothing. It was as if Emma Richardson had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the memory of a yellow sundress and the echo of her laughter. Sarah and her husband David struggled to maintain hope as the first anniversary of Emma's disappearance approached. They had never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that their daughter would somehow come home. But the absence of any concrete leads had worn away at their faith, leaving them in a limbo of grief and desperate hope. The case officially went cold after 18 months, though Detective Walsh assured the family that it would never truly be closed. Emma's file remained on her desk, a constant reminder of the little girl who had disappeared without a trace. The purple bicycle that had never been found became a symbol of the mystery that had consumed the lives of everyone who had known and loved Emma Richardson. For 12 years, life in the neighborhood gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. Children rode their bikes down Maple Street, though parents watched with more vigilant eyes. The yellow ribbon that had been tied to the oak tree in the Richardsons' front yard faded and weathered, but was never removed. Sarah and David had moved away after 5 years, unable to bear the daily reminder of their loss, but they maintained contact with Detective Walsh, who had since retired, but never forgotten the case. The old Henderson house at 1247 Maple Street had stood empty for over a decade, its windows boarded up and its yard overgrown with weeds. Mrs. Henderson, Emma's former piano teacher, had passed away 2 years after Emma's disappearance, and the property had fallen into disrepair. The house had become something of a local eyesore, with its peeling paint and sagging roof, serving as a reminder of better times. In the spring of 2024, a development company finally purchased the property with plans to demolish the old structure and build a modern duplex. The renovation crew, led by contractor Mike Sullivan, began work on a Monday morning in March. Sullivan, a man in his 50s who had been working construction for over 30 years, knew the neighborhood well. He remembered when Emma Richardson had gone missing, remembered the search teams and the helicopters, remembered the way the tragedy had affected everyone who lived nearby. The demolition process was routine for the first 2 days. The crew stripped out the old fixtures, removed the outdated electrical wiring, and began tearing down the interior walls. It was on the 3rd day, when they began working on the basement, that they made the discovery that would change everything. Sullivan was operating the jackhammer, breaking up the concrete floor to prepare for new foundation work, when he noticed something unusual. In the northeast corner of the basement, beneath what had once been a utility room, the concrete seemed different. It was newer, smoother, and slightly raised compared to the rest of the floor. "Hey, Rodriguez," Sullivan called to his assistant, a young man named Carlos who had been working with him for 3 years. "Come take a look at this." Carlos approached, wiping sweat from his forehead with his work shirt. The basement was dimly lit, with only the harsh glare of their work lights cutting through the dusty air. As he examined the area Sullivan was pointing to, Carlos frowned. "That's weird," he said, running his hand over the concrete. "This section definitely wasn't poured at the same time as the rest of the floor." Sullivan nodded, his experienced eye recognizing the subtle differences in the concrete work. In his 3 decades of construction, he had learned to read the history of a building through its bones. and this basement was telling a story that didn't make sense. Mrs. Henderson was in her 80s when she died, Sullivan mused, his voice echoing in the empty basement. I can't imagine she would have had any reason to tear up her basement floor and re-pour concrete. The two men exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing but neither wanting to voice it aloud. There was something unsettling about the newer concrete, something that made the basement feel colder despite the warm March weather outside. Should we just break through it? Carlos asked, his voice uncertain. Sullivan considered this for a moment. Standard procedure would be to simply demolish everything and start fresh, but something about the situation nagged at him. The newer concrete was roughly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, an unusual size for any normal repair work. Let's be careful, Sullivan said finally. Take it slow. They began chipping away at the concrete methodically, their tools making sharp echoing sounds in the confined space. As they worked, Sullivan couldn't shake the feeling that they were uncovering something that had been deliberately hidden. The concrete was thicker than necessary for a simple repair, almost as if it had been designed to conceal rather than to fix. After an hour of careful work, they had created a hole large enough to see what lay beneath. Sullivan directed the work light down into the opening, and what he saw made his blood run cold. There, wrapped in what appeared to be a deteriorating blue tarp, was the unmistakable outline of a small human form. Jesus Christ, Carlos whispered, stepping back from the opening as if it might bite him. Sullivan's hands were shaking as he reached for his cell phone. His mind raced through the implications of what they had discovered. A child-sized body, buried beneath concrete in a basement, in a house that had been empty for years, in a neighborhood where a little girl had vanished without a trace 12 years ago. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. This is Mike Sullivan at 1247 Maple Street, Sullivan said, his voice barely steady. We're renovating a house and we found a body in the basement. Child's body. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, the property was surrounded by police cars, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Detective Martinez, who had been a rookie officer when Emma disappeared, was now a seasoned investigator leading the scene. Crime scene technicians carefully excavated the rest of the concrete, photographing and documenting every step of the process. As they worked, more details emerged. The body was that of a young girl, approximately 8 to 10 years old, wrapped in the blue tarp along with several personal items. Among these items was a small purple bicycle, its paint faded but still recognizable. The white handlebar streamers had deteriorated, but the small bell remained intact. Most devastating of all was the tiny yellow sundress with daisy print, now stained and fragile after 12 years, but still identifiable as the outfit Emma Richardson had been wearing on the day she disappeared. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Sarah and David Richardson, now divorced and living in different states, both received calls from Detective Martinez within hours of the discovery. The conversation was brief and heartbreaking, confirming what they had feared but never allowed themselves to believe. Emma was dead, and had been dead for all these years. The autopsy would later reveal that Emma had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being struck by a heavy object. The medical examiner estimated that she had been dead for approximately 12 years, placing her death very close to the time of her disappearance. But the discovery of Emma's body was only the beginning of the investigation. The basement where she had been buried had belonged to Mrs. Henderson, Emma's piano teacher, who had died of natural causes in 2017, 5 years after Emma's disappearance. The woman who had helped search for Emma, who had comforted Sarah during those first terrible days, who had played hymns at the memorial service held on the first anniversary of Emma's disappearance, had been hiding Emma's body in her basement the entire time. Detective Martinez began the painstaking process of reconstructing the events of July 15, 2012. Mrs. Henderson had died of natural causes 5 years after Emma's disappearance, taking her secrets with her to the grave. But the evidence found in the basement began to tell a story that painted a horrifying picture of what had happened to Emma Richardson. Among the items buried with Emma's body was a small tape recorder, its plastic casing cracked, but the tape inside still intact. When investigators finally managed to play the recording, they heard Mrs. Henderson's voice, frail and filled with remorse, confessing to Emma's death. "I never meant for it to happen," the elderly woman's voice whispered through the static. "She came for her piano lesson that day, just like always. but she had seen something in my basement, something I couldn't let her tell anyone about. I couldn't let her ruin everything. The recording continued, revealing that Mrs. Henderson had been hiding cash in her basement, money that she had been stealing from the church collection plate for years. Emma had apparently discovered the hiding place during one of her visits and had asked innocent questions about the money. Fearing exposure, Mrs. Henderson had struck the child with a heavy candlestick, killing her instantly. The confession detailed how Mrs. Henderson had spent the night burying Emma's body and her bicycle in the basement, then had mixed and poured concrete over the grave. She had participated in the search efforts, had comforted Emma's family, had lived with the secret for 5 years until her death in 2017, all while Emma lay buried beneath her feet. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. People who had known Mrs. Henderson as a kind, elderly woman who taught piano and played organ at the local church struggled to reconcile that image with the cold-blooded killer she had been. The trust that had been shattered by Emma's disappearance 12 years earlier was destroyed completely by the truth of her death. Sarah Richardson, now 41 and living in Oregon, returned to the neighborhood for the first time in 7 years to attend Emma's funeral. The little girl who had vanished on a summer afternoon was finally laid to rest, her purple bicycle buried with her as a reminder of the childhood that had been stolen from her. The house at 1247 Maple Street was never rebuilt. The development company quietly sold the property to the city, which converted it into a small memorial garden. A bench was placed where Mrs. Henderson's front door had once stood, with a plaque reading, "In memory of Emma Richardson, whose light was dimmed too soon." Detective Martinez, now in his 50s and nearing retirement, kept Emma's case file on his desk until his final day on the force. The little girl who had disappeared while riding her purple bicycle had finally come home, though not in the way anyone had hoped. The mystery that had haunted the neighborhood for 12 years was solved, but the pain of the truth was almost harder to bear than the uncertainty had been. The yellow ribbon on the oak tree in front of the Richardsons' old house was finally removed, replaced by a small purple ribbon that fluttered in the breeze. Emma's story became a cautionary tale about the monsters that can hide behind kind faces and the terrible secrets that can lurk in the most ordinary of places. In the end, Emma Richardson's disappearance had been solved not by brilliant detective work or eyewitness testimony, but by the simple act of renovating an old house. The purple bicycle that had never been found had been there all along, buried beneath concrete and lies, waiting for someone to dig deep enough to uncover the truth. The neighborhood of Maple Street would never be the same. The children who rode their bikes down the quiet street now knew that sometimes the most dangerous place is the one that seems the safest. And in the memorial garden where Mrs. Henderson's house once stood, visitors would sometimes hear the faint sound of a bicycle bell carried on the wind, a reminder that some secrets are too terrible to stay buried forever. As Sarah Richardson placed flowers on Emma's grave for the first time in 12 years, she whispered the words she had longed to say. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, sweetheart, but you're home now. You're finally home." The case of Emma Richardson serves as a stark reminder that evil can wear the mask of kindness, and that those we trust the most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us the deepest. The purple bicycle that had been Emma's pride and joy became a symbol of innocence lost, buried beneath the foundation of a house where a child had gone to learn music and instead met her death. In the years that followed, the story of Emma Richardson would be told and retold, a cautionary tale about the fragility of childhood and the importance of questioning the actions of those in positions of trust. The renovators who had uncovered her body would never forget the moment they realized they had found not just human remains, but the answer to a mystery that had haunted an entire community for over a decade. The truth about Emma Richardson's disappearance had finally been revealed, but the scars it left on her family and community would never fully heal. Some secrets once uncovered change everything, and the discovery in the basement of 1247 Maple Street proved that sometimes the most horrifying truth is the one that has been hiding in plain sight all along.